Olivia Burke had always imagined that one day she would live in a place where she could finally breathe. After years of running a successful landscaping business in the heart of the city and dealing with the constant noise, traffic, and unending demands of her high-end clientele, she was ready for a change. The chaos of downtown living had worn her thin. She needed a home that would offer her not just walls and a roof, but space, solitude, and most of all, control over her own surroundings. It was this longing for peace and privacy that led her to an old, affluent residential community on the outskirts of the city, nestled between dense woods and rolling hills. The lots here were spacious, the houses tasteful but not ostentatious, and best of all, the properties came with long, private driveways that meandered away from the main roads. The house Olivia chose had belonged to a retired architect who, according to the agent, had fiercely protected the privacy of his estate. The driveway was technically a private road, deeded as part of the property itself, secured by sturdy iron gates that could be opened remotely or manually. The gate was not just a decorative feature, it was an integral part of the property's layout, and legally, the land it enclosed was entirely Olivia's domain. The closing process had been thorough. Olivia had hired a meticulous property attorney to review every clause in the deed. There were no hidden easements, no ambiguous shared access clauses. The gates, the road, and the land it crossed belonged solely to her. When she finally moved in, there was a sense of triumph, not just because she had found her sanctuary, but because she had done everything properly, by the book. She spent her first weeks settling in, overseeing renovations inside the house and updating the gate's control system to a newer, more secure version that allowed her to manage access codes and monitor openings from her phone. For Olivia, the gate represented more than security. It was a symbol of the boundaries she had fought hard to establish in her life. What she hadn't anticipated was the local homeowners council, led by Diane West, a long-serving president with a reputation for running the community like a private fiefdom. Diane was not an elected official in any formal sense. Rather, she had chaired the local council for so many years that most residents accepted her authority without question. She was known for her sharp suits, her immaculate home, and her tendency to insert herself into every aspect of neighborhood affairs, from landscaping guidelines to garbage collection schedules. At first, Olivia had paid little attention to the council or to Diane. Her property was legally independent of any association bylaws, a fact her attorney had confirmed. The council might set standards for the appearance of homes and yards, but their influence ended at the property line, and Olivia's gate was that line. The first month passed without incident. Olivia kept to herself, spending long hours in her workshop and her gardens. She greeted the occasional passerby politely but didn't seek out social interaction. Then, late one night as she returned from an evening event in the city, Olivia noticed a strange car idling near her gate. It wasn't a neighbor's car. She knew the regular vehicles in the area. The driver seemed to be observing her property. By the time she approached, the car had driven off. Concerned, Olivia checked her security logs and saw that the gate had been opened manually several times during the past week. Alarmed, she scheduled an immediate inspection. The technician found that the old emergency bypass box had not been properly sealed by the previous owner. Anyone with a basic understanding of gate systems could have opened it. Olivia had the bypass disabled and the system fully updated. From then on, the gate would remain closed unless opened remotely or by specific authorized codes. Shortly after the upgrade, Diane West appeared, unannounced, one late morning. Olivia had been in the garden when she heard the chime indicating someone had entered through the pedestrian side gate. Diane stood at the end of the drive, dressed impeccably, a bottle of wine in one hand and a bright, practiced smile on her face. Olivia met her with cautious courtesy. Diane wasted no time on small talk. After a few perfunctory pleasantries about the beauty of the property, she got to the point. "You know, dear," Diane said with an air of gentle condescension, "we've always kept the access road open here. Emergency vehicles, delivery trucks, even service workers rely on it being passable at all times. It's a matter of community safety and spirit. Her gaze flicked pointedly toward the closed gate. I trust you understand. Olivia's response was measured but firm. She explained that the property was private, the road was legally hers, and the new gate controls complied with all municipal safety standards. Emergency access was preserved through the approved override codes registered with the local fire and police departments. There was no legal requirement to keep the gate permanently open. Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, she replied, her tone silky, of course, it's your property, but you'll find things run more smoothly here when we all follow the same customs. No one likes to feel shut out. With that, she handed Olivia the bottle of wine and left, her words hanging in the air like a thinly veiled warning. In the days that followed, Olivia noticed subtle shifts in the neighborhood's atmosphere. Conversations that had once been cordial became cooler. A few residents who had previously waved as they passed now seemed to avoid eye contact. More troubling, Olivia received a formal letter from the council, couched in bureaucratic language, expressing concern about the potential obstruction of essential access routes and requesting that she return the gate to its prior always open status. The letter was unsigned but clearly orchestrated by Diane. Recognizing the stakes, Olivia chose not to respond hastily. Instead, she forwarded the letter to her attorney, requesting a formal legal review. Simultaneously, she filed a request for an official statement from the municipal fire department confirming that her gate system met all emergency access standards. Within a week, she had her answer in writing. Her system was compliant, and there was no legal basis for the council's demand. Armed with this documentation, Olivia instructed her attorney to prepare a formal reply. The letter was clear, professional, and legally grounded. It reaffirmed her property rights and compliance with municipal codes and gently reminded the council that any further attempts to pressure her would be regarded as harassment. For a brief time, it seemed the matter might settle. The council did not immediately respond, and Olivia resumed her routines. Yet the undercurrent of tension remained. One afternoon, as she reviewed her security footage, Olivia noticed something odd. Someone had tampered with her gate's control panel. The damage was subtle but deliberate. A severed cable that disabled the auto-close function. This was no accident. Olivia did not confront the council directly. Instead, she followed the proper channels. She had the gate serviced by a licensed technician, documented the damage, and filed a report with the local police. The police opened a case, listing the incident as property damage under investigation. It was clear now that this was no longer a simple neighborly dispute. Someone, very likely under Diane's influence, had escalated the conflict. Yet, Olivia remained composed. She understood that reacting emotionally would only feed the narrative being spun against her. Instead, she doubled down on legal and procedural correctness, ensuring that every step she took was verifiable and unimpeachable. What Olivia didn't know was that Diane was preparing her next move, one that would push the situation from simmering tension to outright confrontation. The peace Olivia had sought in her new home was about to be shattered in a way neither she nor anyone else in the neighborhood could have anticipated. The days following the incident with the damaged gate cable unfolded with an unnerving quiet. But beneath that silence, Olivia sensed an atmosphere thick with unspoken hostility. There was no official word from the council or from Diane, yet the tension was undeniable. A few of the neighbors who had once exchanged pleasantries now passed her by with stiff nods or avoided her altogether. Olivia, pragmatic by nature, chose to treat these social shifts as background noise. Her focus remained on maintaining the integrity of her property and her legal position. What she did not expect, however, was how swiftly the conflict would escalate to a new level. One chilly morning, Olivia found an envelope slipped into her mailbox, though it lacked the usual postage markings. It was hand-delivered, which immediately piqued her curiosity and concern. The envelope was embossed with the insignia of the community council. Inside was a formal-looking document titled Notice of Compliance Review regarding her property. The language of the notice was deliberately dense, crafted to appear official and intimidating. It cited unspecified recent observations of potential non-compliance with community access standards and declared that a formal inspection would take place within 5 business days. No clear legal authority was referenced, and nowhere did the document specify which ordinance or code had been allegedly violated. Olivia understood immediately that this was a bluff, a manufactured attempt to pressure her through bureaucratic theater. Still, she was not about to underestimate the implications. She forwarded the document to her attorney, along with a detailed account of the gate tampering incident and the current state of neighborhood relations. Her attorney responded within hours, noting that the notice had no legal force but advising Olivia to prepare thoroughly in case further provocations followed. The most prudent course, he said, was to document everything meticulously, maintain her existing legal compliance, and avoid direct confrontation. As Olivia mulled over her attorney's advice, another complication arose, this time more concrete. That very afternoon, a service truck from a local property maintenance company pulled up near her gate. Olivia, observing from her office window, noted that the truck bore the logo of a firm known to have contracts with the Council for General Neighborhood Upkeep. 2 workers emerged and began examining the exterior of her gate and the surrounding fence line, clipboards in hand. When Olivia approached to inquire about their presence, they claimed they were conducting routine inspections for community safety. Olivia asked for identification and an official work order. The men hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, before one admitted that they had been sent by the council to assess potential access obstructions. Olivia, calm but firm, informed them that they were trespassing on private property and had no authority to conduct such an inspection. She politely requested that they leave immediately. After some grumbling, they complied, but not before Olivia discreetly photographed their vehicle and license plate. This brazen attempt to encroach upon her property forced Olivia to reevaluate the situation. It was no longer just an undercurrent of social pressure. It had become an orchestrated campaign to undermine her rights. The fact that outside contractors were now being used to legitimize the council's interference suggested a more aggressive strategy was in play, likely spearheaded by Diane. Olivia again consulted her attorney, who recommended sending a cease-and-desist letter to both the council and the maintenance firm, formally asserting her property boundaries and the illegality of further unauthorized inspections. That evening, as Olivia reviewed her security footage, she discovered yet another disturbing development. 2 days earlier, late at night, an unfamiliar vehicle had stopped briefly at her gate. The driver had exited the car, approached the gate, and appeared to examine the control box before quickly retreating. The footage was grainy, but the figure's posture and movements conveyed a clear sense of intent. Olivia immediately provided the footage to the police as part of the ongoing property damage report. The officer handling the case acknowledged that while the footage alone might not be sufficient to identify the individual, it added weight to the narrative of escalating harassment. As the days passed, Olivia's resolve hardened. She upgraded her security system further, adding discreet additional cameras to cover previously unmonitored angles. She also began keeping a detailed journal of every incident, conversation, and observation related to the conflict, an invaluable tool should legal action become necessary. Her goal was not to escalate the situation through retaliation, but to create an irrefutable record that would stand up in court if required. Yet despite her careful efforts to remain above the fray, the provocations continued. The supposed compliance inspection deadline came and went without any official visit, but instead, Olivia received another letter, this time an unsigned flyer distributed to multiple homes in the neighborhood. The flyer accused an unnamed resident of endangering community safety by restricting access to emergency services through unauthorized gate modifications. The language was inflammatory, clearly designed to sway public opinion against her. Though no names were mentioned, The reference to recent disputes over private gate access left little doubt about who the target was. Olivia, though frustrated, resisted the urge to respond publicly. Instead, she brought the flyer to her attorney, who drafted a formal warning to the council regarding the dissemination of defamatory materials. The warning made it clear that should this campaign of misinformation continue, legal action for defamation would be pursued. Around this time, Olivia began noticing an odd pattern in her daily comings and goings. On several occasions, she would find vehicles parked conspicuously near her gate, their drivers apparently loitering or observing the property. While she could not prove these individuals were connected to the council or Diane, the timing and frequency of these occurrences were too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Once again, she logged the incidents, captured license plates when possible, and reported them to the police as a part of the ongoing file. The mounting stress was undeniable. Olivia prided herself on her composure, but the cumulative weight of these events began to wear on her. Yet each attempt to intimidate her only strengthened her determination to uphold her rights. She knew the council's tactics relied on psychological pressure, creating an environment in which she would feel isolated, overwhelmed, and ultimately coerced into compliance. But Olivia was not about to yield to such manipulations. Unbeknownst to her, however, Diane was preparing a more direct confrontation, one that would abandon the pretense of process and diplomacy altogether. The battle over the gate was no longer a question of neighborhood customs or even personal grudges. For Diane, it had become a test of dominance, a challenge to her long-held authority, and she was prepared to take reckless measures to assert that authority, regardless of the legal or personal consequences. The catalyst for the next escalation would not be another letter or inspection notice. It would be an act of impulsive aggression, one that would thrust the entire conflict into public view and force a reckoning that no amount of council maneuvering could obscure. The days that followed were marked by an uneasy lull. Olivia had expected that the council, or more precisely Diane, would respond in some form to the cease-and-desist letter her attorney had issued. But there was no official acknowledgement, no new correspondence, no further visits from maintenance contractors or strangers at her gate. It was almost as if the campaign had temporarily stalled. Yet Olivia sensed that this quiet was not an end but a pause, a recalibration of tactics. The tension in the neighborhood remained palpable. A few neighbors seemed more openly distant, while others appeared caught in an awkward limbo, unsure whether to engage with her or avoid her entirely. She chose not to dwell on these social undercurrents. Her focus remained on protecting her property and maintaining her legal standing. Still, the waiting weighed heavily. It was in this atmosphere of tense anticipation that the next phase of escalation arrived, more brazen and invasive than anything that had come before. It began on a gray, windswept morning when Olivia returned home after an early client consultation. As she approached her gate, she immediately noticed something was off. A large, fluorescent orange sticker had been affixed to the front of the gate, proclaiming in bold black letters, "Notice of code violation. Access required. Non-compliant installation subject to penalties." There was no official seal, no municipal department referenced, just the insignia of the community council stamped hastily in one corner. The message was clearly designed to appear official, to intimidate anyone who might see it. Olivia's first instinct was anger, but she quickly shifted into action. She photographed the notice from multiple angles, carefully removed it without damaging her property, and preserved it as evidence. After securing the gate, she contacted her attorney and forwarded both the images and a detailed account of the event. The attorney, clearly frustrated on her behalf, reiterated that the council had no jurisdiction over private property and that any further acts of this nature would strengthen their case for harassment. She advised Olivia to continue documenting everything and to remain vigilant. Olivia took this advice to heart. She had her security contractor perform another comprehensive sweep of her gate's electronics, checking for any new tampering. The system was intact, but the contractor pointed out faint scrape marks on the lower panel of the gate's housing, likely left by someone attempting to pry it open with a tool. The evidence was circumstantial but troubling. That evening, while reviewing her security footage, Olivia spotted something even more concerning. On the previous night, around 2 a.m., a dark SUV had pulled up just beyond the edge of her property. A figure had exited the vehicle, approached the gate on foot, and spent several minutes inspecting the control panel before retreating. The footage wasn't clear enough to make an identification, but the intent was unmistakable. Olivia forwarded this new evidence to the police officer handling her case, who agreed that the pattern of harassment was escalating and promised to include the new footage in the active file. Meanwhile, word of the supposed violation began to spread through the neighborhood. Several neighbors, some of whom Olivia had never spoken with directly, began to glance at her property with barely concealed curiosity, or suspicion. Olivia even overheard a snippet of conversation between two passing residents, one expressing concern that emergency services couldn't get through to her house. The misinformation campaign was working, sowing doubt and division among the residents. Determined to counter this narrative, Olivia requested a formal letter from the municipal fire department, reaffirming that her gate installation remained fully compliant with emergency access standards. The department obliged, issuing an official statement on department letterhead, which Olivia provided to her attorney and kept on hand should any further accusations arise. But it was clear that facts alone would not be enough to counteract the growing tide of social pressure. The next incident pushed the conflict into an even more personal and invasive realm. One afternoon, as Olivia was working in her garden, she noticed a pair of unfamiliar men walking along the edge of her property, clipboards in hand. They appeared to be taking photographs and measurements of the fence line and the gate area. Olivia approached them calmly and asked their purpose. The men identified themselves as representatives of a private safety assessment firm, contracted by the council to conduct an independent review of access routes throughout the neighborhood. When Olivia pointed out that they were on private property and had no legal right to conduct such a review without her consent, the men became evasive. One of them suggested that the council's authority superseded private boundaries in matters of community safety, a claim Olivia knew to be legally false. Without raising her voice, Olivia instructed them to leave immediately and warned that any further unauthorized entry would be treated as trespassing. She documented the encounter thoroughly, photographing the men, their vehicle, and recording their statements as best as possible. Again, this evidence was provided to both her attorney and the police. The incident reinforced her suspicion that Diane and the council were now seeking to fabricate grounds for legal action, perhaps hoping to claim that her gate installation violated some vaguely defined community safety standard. As if to confirm this suspicion, a new letter arrived just days later, this one bearing the council's letterhead but unsigned. It declared that the council had received multiple complaints regarding the accessibility of Olivia's property and that a formal hearing would be scheduled to address the matter. The language was carefully crafted to sound authoritative while offering no actual legal foundation. Olivia's attorney responded swiftly, sending a letter to the council stating that any attempt to enforce community standards on private property would constitute overreach and would be met with legal action. Despite these efforts, the psychological pressure mounted. Olivia began receiving anonymous phone calls late at night, brief, silent, unsettling. Once, she found her garbage bins overturned and scattered across her driveway in the early morning hours. These petty acts of harassment were clearly meant to wear her down, to instill fear and uncertainty. But Olivia refused to be intimidated. She expanded her security measures further, adding motion-activated lighting and additional cameras to cover every vulnerable angle of her property. She also began coordinating more closely with the police, who now regarded her case as an active harassment investigation. Through all of this, Olivia remained outwardly composed. She continued to manage her business, maintain her home, and engage with those neighbors who still treated her cordially. But beneath that composure, the strain was real. The constant vigilance, the erosion of what should have been a peaceful home life, the knowledge that her privacy was under siege, these weighed heavily on her. Yet her determination remained unshaken. She had invested too much in this property, in this life she had built for herself, to surrender to intimidation. And still, beneath all the surface tensions, a larger confrontation loomed. Diane's strategy of indirect harassment had failed to break Olivia's resolve. The next move, Olivia sensed, would be more direct, more reckless, and when it came, it would force a reckoning that no one in the neighborhood could ignore. By late autumn, Olivia's life had settled into a strange rhythm, a constant undercurrent of tension beneath the ordinary tasks of her daily routine. She had grown accustomed to double-checking her security system each morning, reviewing footage every evening, and documenting even the smallest irregularities. Her attorney remained on retainer, and her communication with the police had become almost routine. Yet, despite the layers of vigilance she had built around herself, the psychological wear was undeniable. What had once been her sanctuary now felt like a battleground, and each day without incident was shadowed by the knowledge that the next move could come at any moment. The escalation arrived not through stealth or sabotage this time, but through an overt and highly public confrontation. It began with a letter, officially formatted, though still legally toothless, announcing that a Community Safety and Access Review meeting would be held at the council hall. The letter, which was distributed to every household in the neighborhood, made pointed reference to ongoing concerns regarding certain properties, and urged all residents to attend and voice their opinions. Though Olivia's name was not mentioned, the implication was unmistakable. Olivia recognized the tactic for what it was, a public shaming attempt, designed to isolate her further and pressure her into compliance. Her attorney advised her that she was under no obligation to attend, and that the council had no legal standing to enforce any decisions made at such a meeting. Yet, after some deliberation, Olivia chose to go, not to argue or defend herself, but to observe, to listen, and above all, to document. The night of the meeting was cold and damp, the council hall lit with harsh fluorescent lights that gave the space a sterile, oppressive atmosphere. The room was crowded, more so than Olivia had expected. It seemed that the council's campaign of fear and misinformation had succeeded in stirring considerable interest. Diane presided over the gathering with her usual polished poise, greeting attendees warmly and offering carefully crafted words about community cohesion and the importance of mutual respect. When the meeting formally commenced, Diane opened the floor to comments. Predictably, a few residents spoke in vague terms about safety concerns and the need for open access, parroting the language of the council's flyers. One particularly vocal resident even suggested that Olivia's gate was creating a hazard by discouraging emergency services from entering the area, a claim easily refuted by the fire department's own statements, though none of the speakers acknowledged this fact. Olivia remained silent, seated toward the back of the room. She took detailed notes, recorded key portions of the meeting on her phone, as permitted by local law, and observed the dynamics at play. It was clear that while some residents genuinely believed the council's narrative, others appeared uneasy, uncertain of the facts. The meeting revealed something else as well. A small but significant faction of residents who resented Diane's heavy-handed tactics. They did not speak up publicly that night, but Olivia noticed the sidelong glances, the folded arms, the frowns of disapproval. Toward the end of the meeting, Diane finally addressed the matter more directly. In a carefully measured tone, she announced that the council would be drafting a resolution recommending that all private access points within the community remain open, or at least fully accessible to emergency services at all times. The language was deliberately vague, offering no clear enforcement mechanism but creating a pretext for continued pressure. After the meeting adjourned, Olivia was approached by two residents she scarcely knew, an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. In hushed tones, they expressed quiet support, offering sympathy for the harassment she had endured. One of them, after glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard, handed Olivia a worn folder containing copies of the original community guidelines from the neighborhood's founding, a set of documents that predated the council's current policies and clearly delineated the limits of its authority. Olivia thanked them sincerely. The gesture, though small, was a welcome reminder that not everyone had fallen under Diane's sway. With this new documentation in hand, Olivia's attorney prepared a comprehensive legal packet, a letter reaffirming her rights, the original community guidelines, the fire department's compliance statement, and a formal warning to the council that any further harassment or attempts to undermine her property rights would trigger immediate legal action. The letter was sent to the council and copied to relevant municipal authorities, ensuring that the council's actions were now under official scrutiny. For a brief time afterward, the tension seemed to ease. The anonymous calls stopped. The late-night loitering ceased. Olivia dared to hope that perhaps the council, faced with mounting legal risks, had chosen to retreat. Yet beneath this surface calm, Diane's resentment festered. Her efforts to dominate the situation through social pressure and procedural bluster had failed, and her personal pride had been wounded in the process. Olivia sensed it instinctively. The conflict was not over. The next move, when it came, would be impulsive, personal, and potentially dangerous. The shift occurred on a crisp, bright afternoon when Olivia returned home from a client meeting. As she approached her gate, she noticed Diane's Mercedes SUV idling at the curb just beyond her property line. Diane herself was seated behind the wheel, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the gate. Olivia parked her car and approached cautiously. Before she could speak, Diane rolled down her window and addressed her with an icy smile. "Olivia," she said smoothly, "I trust you're aware that the council's resolution passed with broad support. It would be wise to reconsider your position before this situation escalates further." Olivia, maintaining her composure, replied calmly, "My property rights are clear. I've complied with all legal requirements, and I will continue to do so. If you have any legitimate concerns, you know the appropriate channels." Diane's smile tightened. "Some of us," she said, her voice edged with contempt, "prefer to resolve matters without lawyers." With that, she rolled up her window and drove off, tires crunching sharply against the gravel. Olivia stood for a moment watching the SUV disappear down the road. There was no mistaking the threat in Diane's words. The encounter confirmed what Olivia had already suspected. The next phase of the conflict would not be fought with letters or meetings. It would be something far more immediate. What Olivia could not yet know was how soon that escalation would come, or how dramatically it would shatter the fragile calm of the neighborhood. The days that followed Diane's thinly veiled threat were marked by an ominous quiet that seemed to settle over the neighborhood like a dense fog. Olivia found herself moving through her routines with a heightened sense of awareness. Every sound outside her windows magnified, every unfamiliar car noticed and logged. Though there had been no new letters or official communications from the council, the silence itself was unnerving, an almost palpable tension that suggested something was brewing just beneath the surface. Olivia's instincts, finely tuned from months of harassment and legal maneuvering, told her that Diane had not backed down. Far from it. She was waiting, biding her time, likely planning a more direct and personal form of retaliation. Her attorney had advised her to maintain her current course, document everything, avoid unnecessary confrontations, and remain vigilant. Olivia adhered strictly to this counsel. She kept her security systems active and regularly checked her cameras. She made certain that her legal documentation was fully updated and easily accessible. And, most importantly, she maintained her composure. The one thing Diane wanted was to force her into a reaction, to provoke her into an impulsive misstep that could be used against her. Olivia was determined not to give her that satisfaction. It was in this tense atmosphere that the first tangible sign of the next escalation appeared. Late one morning, as Olivia was returning from a supply run for her business, she noticed a small group of men gathered near her gate. They were dressed in work clothes, their truck marked with the logo of a local construction firm Olivia did not recognize. The men were inspecting the perimeter of her gate and fence line, appearing to take measurements and make notes. Olivia approached them calmly but firmly, asking their purpose. The apparent foreman informed her that they had been contracted by the council to assess potential upgrades to community access points. Olivia immediately pointed out that her property was privately owned and that no such assessments could be conducted without her consent. When the foreman hesitated, she requested identification and a copy of their work order. They had neither. Olivia instructed them to leave the premises immediately and documented the entire encounter with her phone, later forwarding the information to both her attorney and the police. This brazen attempt to encroach upon her property confirmed Olivia's suspicions that Diane was growing increasingly desperate. The use of an unverified contractor to conduct unauthorized inspections was a clear escalation, one that suggested Diane was no longer content to rely on bureaucratic pressure alone. Olivia's attorney prepared another cease and desist letter, this time specifically naming the construction firm and warning of legal consequences for any further trespass. Yet the most disturbing development came just days later. Olivia returned home one evening to find that her gate had been tampered with yet again. This time, the damage was more severe. The main control box had been forcibly pried open, and several key components had been deliberately severed. The gate remained closed but was no longer operable by remote or keypad. Olivia immediately called her security contractor, who confirmed that the damage was consistent with intentional sabotage. The technician also pointed out another unsettling detail: footprints, clearly visible in the soft earth near the gate, suggesting that more than one person had been involved in the tampering. Olivia contacted the police and filed an updated report, providing photographs of the damage and the footprints. The responding officer took the matter seriously, acknowledging that the pattern of harassment was escalating toward criminal behavior. The case was now being referred to a detective for further investigation. Olivia also had the gate repaired and upgraded once more, installing an additional layer of security that included a reinforced control box and internal tamper sensors that would trigger an immediate alarm if disturbed. Even with these precautions in place, the psychological toll was mounting. Olivia found herself increasingly wary of unfamiliar faces in the neighborhood, her movements more calculated. Her trust in her neighbors eroded. Yet she remained steadfast. Each new act of harassment only reinforced her resolve to see this conflict through to its legal conclusion. The breaking point came on a cold, clear afternoon a week later. Olivia had just returned home and was unloading supplies from her vehicle when she noticed Diane's Mercedes SUV parked once again just beyond her property line. The engine was running, and Diane was seated behind the wheel, her posture tense, her expression unreadable. Olivia watched her cautiously, suspecting another confrontation was imminent. She finished unloading her supplies and began walking toward the house when she heard the sudden roar of the Mercedes engine revving aggressively. Turning back toward the gate, Olivia saw the SUV lurch forward, accelerating rapidly toward the closed gate. There was no hesitation, no attempt to stop. The vehicle slammed into the iron gate with a deafening crash, the impact sending a shudder through the surrounding fence line. The gate buckled under the force, one side partially caved in. The Mercedes wedged awkwardly between the twisted metal. The air was filled with the sound of grinding metal and the acrid scent of burning rubber. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then Olivia, her heart pounding but her mind sharp, sprang into action. She did not approach the vehicle directly. Instead, she immediately called the police, reporting a vehicular assault on her property. She also activated her security system's emergency recording function, ensuring that every angle of the incident was captured in high definition. Within minutes, the first patrol car arrived, sirens wailing. The officers approached the scene cautiously, assessing both the vehicle and Diane, who remained in the driver's seat, visibly shaken but uninjured. Olivia provided a concise, factual account of the incident, presenting her existing documentation and informing the officers of the ongoing harassment she had endured. She also provided them with access to her security footage, which clearly showed Diane's deliberate acceleration toward the gate. As additional officers and a tow truck arrived to extricate the vehicle, word of the incident spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Residents began to gather at the edges of the scene, watching with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Olivia remained composed throughout, interacting with the police professionally and refusing to engage with onlookers. Her attorney, upon being notified, arrived shortly thereafter to oversee the handling of the incident and ensure that Olivia's legal interests were protected. Diane was eventually escorted from the scene by police for questioning. While she was not immediately arrested, it was clear that the severity of her actions had crossed a critical legal threshold. The responding officers informed Olivia that the incident would be investigated as a potential felony. Property damage, reckless endangerment, and possibly even assault with a vehicle. The aftermath of the incident unfolded swiftly. News of Diane's actions spread quickly through the community, and public sentiment began to shift. Many residents who had previously remained neutral or passively supportive of the council now expressed outrage at the blatant violence of the act. Several neighbors reached out to Olivia privately, offering support and condemning Diane's behavior. In the days that followed, Olivia's attorney filed a formal civil suit against Diane for property damage and emotional distress. The police investigation proceeded in parallel, with Diane facing potential criminal charges. The council, now under intense public scrutiny, convened an emergency meeting to address the fallout. Though Diane attempted to downplay the incident as an unfortunate accident, the security footage left little room for such claims. The council ultimately voted to suspend her from her leadership role pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. For Olivia, the weeks following the crash were a whirlwind of legal preparations, property repairs, and cautious optimism. Though the damage to her gate was extensive, it was repairable. More importantly, the incident had finally shifted the balance of power. Diane's reckless actions had undermined her credibility and exposed the true nature of the campaign against Olivia. The tide had turned, but the legal battles were far from over. Through it all, Olivia remained resolute. She had faced down months of harassment, social isolation, and now outright violence, and she had done so with dignity, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to the rule of law. Whatever lay ahead, she was prepared to see it through to the end. In the days that followed the violent incident at Olivia's gate, the neighborhood remained tense, the air thick with speculation and whispered conversations. The sight of Diane's Mercedes crumpled between the twisted iron bars had left an indelible mark on the community. It was no longer possible for anyone to claim ignorance of the conflict or to dismiss it as a matter of petty, neighborly disputes. The image of Diane's deliberate attack had been captured from multiple angles by Olivia's security cameras, and though the footage was not released publicly, enough residents knew of its contents to fuel a steady stream of gossip and shifting allegiances. Olivia, for her part, remained focused and composed. The days immediately after the crash were consumed with legal consultations and formal proceedings. Her attorney filed the civil suit without delay, a meticulously prepared document that detailed not only the property damage but also the broader pattern of harassment Olivia had endured. The police investigation also advanced quickly, aided by the clarity of the evidence. Diane was formally charged with felony property damage and reckless endangerment, charges that carried serious potential penalties under state law. The council, now acutely aware of its own vulnerability, scrambled to contain the fallout. An emergency meeting was convened behind closed doors, with council members debating how best to distance themselves from Diane's actions. Though no official statement was released, word soon spread that Diane had been placed on indefinite suspension from her leadership role. For many in the community, this was a long overdue reckoning. The veneer of Diane's unassailable authority had cracked, and beneath it lay the undeniable truth of her reckless behavior. As the legal process unfolded, Olivia's days became a steady rhythm of preparation and vigilance. Repairs to her gate began promptly, overseen by trusted contractors under the close supervision of her attorney's office. Every detail of the work was documented, ensuring that no further claims of non-compliance could be fabricated. Olivia also upgraded her overall security system once again, adding reinforced physical barriers and additional legal signage that made the boundaries of her property unmistakably clear. Throughout this period, Olivia maintained a steady line of communication with the police. The assigned detective, now fully aware of the broader context, took the investigation seriously, ensuring that no corners were cut. Olivia provided detailed testimony, supported by months of documented evidence. The detective, in turn, assured her that the case would proceed through the proper legal channels, free from any undue influence the council might attempt to exert. Meanwhile, the neighborhood dynamic began to shift. Some residents who had once remained silent now offered quiet words of support. A few even expressed regret for having been swayed by Diane's earlier campaign of misinformation. Olivia accepted these gestures graciously, understanding that fear and social pressure had played a significant role in many of their earlier actions. Yet she remained cautious. Trust, once eroded, was not easily restored. The culmination of this long and grueling conflict arrived in the form of the preliminary court hearing. Held in a modest courtroom at the county courthouse, the hearing drew considerable attention from the community. Though the proceedings were not open to the general public, the presence of local reporters and community observers ensured that news of the outcome would spread quickly. Olivia attended the hearing accompanied by her attorney and a small group of supporters, including the elderly couple who had provided her with the original community guidelines. Diane appeared as well, her demeanor markedly changed. Gone was the polished, commanding presence that had once dominated council meetings. In its place was a figure visibly worn by stress and legal peril. The prosecution presented its case methodically, relying heavily on the unambiguous security footage. The video left little room for doubt. Diane had accelerated deliberately into the closed gate, an act entirely inconsistent with any claim of accidental operation. Coupled with the established pattern of prior harassment, the evidence painted a damning picture of premeditated recklessness. Diane's defense, by contrast, was weak and fragmented. Attempts to frame the incident as a moment of frustration or impaired judgment failed to counter the weight of the video evidence. Moreover, the prosecution skillfully highlighted the broader context, illustrating how Diane's actions were not an isolated lapse, but the culmination of a sustained campaign of pressure and intimidation. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judge ruled that the case would proceed to trial on the most serious charges. Bail was set, and stringent conditions were imposed, including a restraining order that prohibited Diane from any further contact with Olivia or her property. For Olivia, this was a decisive victory. Not only a personal vindication, but a legal acknowledgement of the wrongs she had endured. In the aftermath of the hearing, the neighborhood entered a period of uneasy reflection. The balance of power within the community had shifted irrevocably. The council, now leaderless and tarnished by association, faced growing calls for reform. Residents began to question long-standing practices and the unchecked authority that had allowed Diane's campaign to escalate so dangerously. For Olivia, the experience had been transformative. The months of harassment, the isolation, the fear, none of it had broken her. Instead, she had emerged stronger, more resolute, and deeply aware of the importance of standing firm in the face of unlawful coercion. The legal battle was not yet fully concluded, but the path forward was clear. Whatever the outcome of the upcoming trial, Olivia had already reclaimed her autonomy and her peace of mind. In the quiet moments that followed the hearing, as she walked the restored perimeter of her property, Olivia allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The gate stood once more unbroken, a symbol not of exclusion, but of rightful boundaries. boundaries she had defended with courage, intelligence, and unwavering integrity. The war was not over, but the battle had been won. In the weeks following the court hearing, the atmosphere within the neighborhood underwent a subtle but undeniable transformation. The incident with Diane's deliberate attack on Olivia's gate had shattered the long-standing illusion of the council's invincibility. Whispers of reform circulated quietly among residents who, though once content to remain in Diane's shadow, now recognized the dangers of unchecked authority. For Olivia, however, these broader shifts in community dynamics were of secondary concern. Her focus remained firmly on restoring a sense of normalcy to her life and ensuring that her hard-won rights remained protected. The repairs to her gate and perimeter were completed meticulously, every upgrade and enhancement documented to prevent future disputes. Olivia oversaw each stage of the work herself, her presence on site a deliberate statement that she would not be driven into retreat or submission. The final installation of reinforced control systems and additional surveillance points brought with it a long-awaited sense of security. The gate, once a flashpoint of conflict, now stood as a quiet testament to resilience and legal integrity. As the legal proceedings against Diane moved toward trial, Olivia continued to coordinate closely with her attorney and the detective handling the criminal case. The process was slow, burdened by procedural delays and the complexities inherent in prosecuting a former community leader. Yet Olivia remained patient, her determination undiminished. Each hearing, each legal filing was another step toward accountability. The restraining order remained firmly in place, and Diane's presence within the neighborhood had effectively ceased. Her home, once a hub of social activity, now stood dark and uninviting, a stark reminder of how swiftly power could erode when misused. Olivia's own relationships within the neighborhood evolved in unexpected ways. Some residents who had once maintained a wary distance now approached her with cautious respect. A few offered sincere apologies for their earlier silence, while others expressed quiet admiration for her unwavering resolve. Olivia accepted these interactions graciously but remained guarded. Trust, she understood, was not easily rebuilt, and the scars of months of harassment did not fade overnight. Amid these social recalibrations, Olivia found solace in the routines that had first drawn her to this home. Her business thrived, her gardens flourished, and the long walk she took along the wooded edges of her property became moments of reflection rather than vigilance. The shadows that had once darkened her sense of safety gradually lifted, replaced by a hard-earned confidence in her ability to defend her rights. The broader impact of the conflict rippled outward. The council, weakened by Diane's disgrace and mounting legal liabilities, faced increasing calls for transparency and structural reform. Several members quietly resigned, unwilling to face further scrutiny. Discussions began among residents about establishing a more balanced and accountable governance structure, one that respected property rights and prioritized genuine community welfare over personal agendas. Though Olivia chose not to involve herself directly in these efforts, she supported the movement in principle, recognizing that a healthier community dynamic would ultimately benefit everyone. As the first hints of spring emerged, bringing new life to the landscape Olivia cherished, she allowed herself to reflect on the journey she had endured. What had begun as a simple act of establishing rightful boundaries had evolved into a protracted battle against coercion, misinformation, and outright violence. The experience had tested her resilience in ways she could never have anticipated. Yet through it all, she had remained steadfast, guided by reason, legality, and a refusal to be intimidated. The upcoming trial loomed as the final chapter of this saga, a necessary step toward closure. Olivia prepared for it with the same meticulous care that had characterized her every action throughout the conflict. Regardless of the outcome, the fundamental victory had already been secured. Her rights had been upheld, her property protected, and her peace restored. One crisp morning, as sunlight filtered through the newly budding trees, Olivia stood before her gate, now fully restored and fortified. The quiet hum of the mechanism as it opened and closed felt less like a routine function and more like a quiet affirmation of everything she had fought to preserve. In that moment, she understood with clarity that while no home was ever entirely free from the risk of a conflict, it was the strength of one's response, the choice to stand firm in the face of injustice, that truly defined the boundaries of freedom. Life within the neighborhood would move forward. New leadership would emerge, new relationships would form, and the community, chastened by recent events, would perhaps approach its future with greater humility and respect for individual rights. For Olivia, the ordeal had forged a deeper understanding of both the fragility and the value of peace. She would remain vigilant, but she would no longer live in fear. And as she turned from the gate and walked back toward her house, the sunlight warm upon her shoulders, Olivia Burke knew with unshakable certainty that this was, and would remain, her home. A place not merely of bricks and land, but of hard-earned freedom and enduring resolve.